Welcome everyone to the Tonkin Legal Group, home of the Australian Family Law Podcast, the AFLP. Definitely not the official podcast of the Australian Football League. It is I, as always, Joe, joined by Charlie. How are you, Charlie?
I'm not too bad, thanks, Joe. A little bit flat after the two losses over the weekend from our two clubs. So a week is a long time in footy, as they say. And how are you travelling after the Bombers coming off their second glorious victory the weekend before?
Yep.
Came to a quick end.
Yeah, it was. I knew it was coming. I knew we were going to have a big loss. I could tell the way we were so desperate in that GWS game that they could feel it. The boys could feel it. This was our
Yeah,
grand final. We had to get up. We couldn't
yeah,
lose every game. And if there was any team that was going to let us do it, it was the Giants. And fair to say, I think we might have broken the Giants. They then go on
yeah.
to lose by 50 odd points against the Swans. So we are officially giant killers. But yeah, no, we were never a chance against the Hawks. They never really left second gear, and they absolutely torched us. But a little bit more disappointing with your boys, who we had high hopes for. We tipped them, but
We did.
it just didn't work out.
I think we got a little bit of stage fright, the D's. They got given a big Friday night game under the lights. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but yourself and I and the rest of the team were at
Yep.
a nice work dinner. Um, you may or may not have seen my phone on the table at various stages playing KO throughout the evening. I think I got told off a few times for watching it, but disappointing. But um, yeah, just Geelong. They're just a well run machine. Unfortunately, hate to admit it, but they are a very well drilled, well coached, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it.
You'll get there. You'll get there. You'll get there.
Yeah,
You've got someone from that system now. You've got someone from that machine. So as long as you've got
yeah,
one of those engineers, hey, it's you know, China is rife with its IP theft. So it's if you can
yeah,
if you can tinker a little bit with some of what's
yeah.
coming out of there with Kingy at the helm, I think you certainly have surpassed expectations, and I think you have basically locked up a finals berth at this point. Just a question of whether or not you have to play a wild card or not. That's really all it is.
Exactly. I'd love to avoid a wild card, but yeah, you're right. I think we've definitely exceeded expectations, and to be honest, we're probably getting a little bit greedy from where we thought we were at the start of the year. So no, I'll take it. I'll take it. And we should we touch on the Tigers for our co-host that isn't here with us today, or should we let that one through?
I mean, they were brave to an extent,
Yep. Yep.
and it was another loss. I don't
Yep.
know. St. John must be torn because they're his doggies, and his doggies beat his Tigers. So at the end of the day, he
Yeah.
still wins, right?
He wins. St. John's the real winner, so he'd be wrapped for them.
Well, let's hope that our viewers are also
Yeah.
winners today, because it's going to be a slightly different. We sort of forecasted it last week that the podcast will have a slightly different direction moving forward with a bit more segments, and you're going to see it now, starting with the rules of the game. Yes, it's time for rules of the game, where we explain one family law rule in plain English. Today's rule is spousal maintenance.
So I guess we'll start with what it actually is. So I mean, spousal maintenance, it's financial support that one former partner pays to the other after separation or divorce, in circumstances where one person can't adequately support themselves, and on the flip side, the other person has the financial capacity to help. So I guess in simple terms, it's a way of ensuring that a financially weaker or more vulnerable spouse or partner is supported if they genuinely need that assistance.
So it isn't just simply like, comparing the two of them with what their salaries are. It's a bit more than that.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's a lot more than that. It's probably a bit more of a deep dive into their income, their expenses, and looking at what their future needs are for the more immediate future, as opposed to the long term.
Yeah, exactly. And maintaining what their lifestyle was like during the course of the relationship is also a pretty big one. And for those of you out there who want to know a little bit more about the nitty gritty, the specifics, it is all in the Family Law Act. So obviously this applies to married couples, but it can also apply for de facto relationships as well. So if you are in a married situation where you haven't quite divorced yet, or you have, there is certain sections. So if this was the case, I would look at section 72, which basically sets out the rights there. And if you are in a de facto relationship and that you are going through a separation there, you would be looking at potentially section 90 SB and SE. So you'll be looking in those two different sections there of the Family Law Act to get some more clarity in relation to your standing and what sort of orders can be made. Are there any time limits with this, Charlie?
Yeah, so in terms of issuing court proceedings to seek spousal maintenance orders, proceedings arising from a marriage, firstly, they need to be commenced within 12 months after the date a divorce order takes effect. So on the other hand, for de facto relationships, the usual time limits within 2 years after separation. Any application outside of that time period generally requires leave of the court, which basically means you need to convince the court why you're applying beyond that time limitation. But I guess importantly, a married person doesn't have to wait until the divorce takes place to seek spousal maintenance. So the court explains that an application can be made before divorce, and although it's unusual, it may potentially be made while the marriage remains intact, funnily enough.
Yeah, that would be pretty funny. And I noticed that these timelines are very similar to a classic property settlement timeline as well, within 12 months of divorce and within 2 years of separation from a de facto relationship. So clearly what the rule is, in simple terms, looking at what spousal maintenance is, it is one party having a need because they can't sustain themselves, and the other party having a capacity to meet those needs. If you can tick both of those boxes, you're well on your way to getting a spousal maintenance claim in your favour. We now move to ask the umpire. Here we are, time for Ask the Umpire, where we take questions that might sound simple, but usually they come with some important qualifications. And I guess the very first question we'll put here on the table, Charlie, is you got a former spouse who earns more than the other person. Is the person earning less automatically entitled to spousal maintenance?
Yeah, the short answer is no, or not automatically, not necessarily. So it's a lot more broad than that, the consideration. So while that difference in income, it's definitely relevant. If we go back to the legal test that we discussed before, you need to apply both those elements. So the first question is whether that applicant is unable to support themselves adequately, having regard to things like their income, property or resources, or their relevant circumstances. So if the applicant can, taking those factors into account, if they can still meet their reasonable expenses and they can support themselves adequately, then if there is solely just an income disparity on its own, then that probably wouldn't be enough to satisfy that entitlement for spousal maintenance.
Look, I've asked you a few questions. You can ask me one back if you want.
I'd love to. So now, even if the applicant demonstrates that there is a shortfall, that would still be the case.
Yes, you'd have to examine their ability to pay. Sometimes someone might have a high income, but you also got to look into beyond just the income, as we mentioned, because they might have heaps of liabilities. They could have tax obligations. They might have some really high housing costs of their own. If they're, for example, they're the ones who stayed in the house with a really high mortgage, can be really hard. If they're a primary carer of children, which also then further inhibits their ability to earn above that amount, and other reasonable commitments. It's not quite black and white. It's not straightforward. You obviously have to look at a range of these factors to determine beyond just what the headline salary is, to consider the financial circumstances of both parties. So I suppose in summary, it's not an automatic free kick just because one party earns more. You need to look at the big picture. You need to look at the finances behind it, so that you can see whether or not there really is a capacity to meet the needs of the other party.
Yep. Now, did you want to ask me the next one, or do you want me to fire back with another one for you?
You can fire back. You can fire back. Have at it. Come on.
All right, another one. So, next question: can my partner simply refuse to pay spousal maintenance?
Look, it will. I know it's a classic, the age-old answer of it depends. It depends. What does it depend on? Well, is there a legal obligation already in place? If there is no court order or a binding agreement which requires one party to make that payment to the other, then yes, that person who's being asked to pay can absolutely say, no, I'm not going to pay. They can voluntarily say no. But just because they say no, does that mean that does not put an end to the issue? The issue still continues, because if you genuinely do not have that ability to pay and you need assistance and they can pay, well, you can make it obligatory on them by taking it to the court. You can make that application and you can show whether or not you have a genuine need and whether or not the other party has the capacity to do so. Okay. And it can be pretty simple in terms of setting out your finances, setting out how much your earnings are. And if you have been a reliant party on the other person who has always been funding everything, well, it can be very straightforward to show a dependence on that income coming in, establishing a certain established living arrangement that this party has come to get used to over a long period of time. It can be very easy to demonstrate, well, this person certainly has the means to do so because they've been doing it for the last 15 years. So it can be pretty straightforward to make that claim. But of course, as we mentioned previously, there might be those underlying liabilities that might not have been there previously, and you need to have a full-blown examination of their circumstances, and you would be required to look into that thanks to the duty of disclosure before you issue proceedings. But you're always open, if you find that they certainly do have the means to pay, to take them to court for that.
And touching on the duty of disclosure, feel free to go back to one of our previous episodes on the duty of disclosure. The episode number escapes me, but I'm sure Joe,
It's all there.
you'll remind us. It's all there. It's all there.
It's all there, but I'll make sure I put it in the description down below. Now, also, that's in the case of if there are no orders. If there are orders, well, you got to follow the orders. Simply, if someone has successfully gone and maybe you filed a consent order application, or you've already been through court and you've got orders, whether it be interim or final, but it would be interim orders. You are required to comply with those orders. Just because your circumstances, for example, might have changed, you need to get advice about that. You can't just unilaterally decide to end things, because it's really important that when a court makes orders, that you continue to comply with those orders, lest you won't be happy. You won't be happy. Let's just say that.
But I get, if your circumstances have genuinely changed, for example, if you've fallen ill, unwell, and you can't work, or if you've lost your job, then obviously that's a genuine situation, which it does mean that your circumstances have changed and they're varied. So you can make an application to vary that order, or you can look to the agreement if you've got a spousal maintenance agreement in place, and see if there's any, ways in which you can have the agreement varied or set aside based on those changes in the circumstances. And Joe, what about another, I guess, quick fire question. A person who says, I don't have to pay spousal maintenance because we're separated.
No, that's not correct. There is an obligation to financially assist or support a former spouse or a current spouse, and that continues on after separation, depending again on
Yeah.
their need and your capacity to pay.
Yeah.
And that is clearly set out there in the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia. I guess the reasoning behind that is in circumstances where a spouse can look after and support their former spouse or partner, then it should be on them as opposed to the Australian taxpayer at large to do so. So
Yeah.
it is a fairly established principle. We then move on to fact or furphy. It's time for fact or furphy. I'll give you a proposition. You tell me whether this is accurate or not, Charlie. First one,
Let's do it.
spousal maintenance. Does it apply in every breakup?
It doesn't apply in every single separation. I mean, it's always going to be a relevant consideration, but I guess it's not as simple as saying, all right, the relationship has ended. Let's now look to apply spousal maintenance. Again, we always have to apply the test. So whether there's a need and whether the other party has capacity to meet those reasonable expenses.
And now turn to some honest predictions. Charlie, we've got the Crom this week. Please tell me we're going to be okay.
All right, so this segment is honest predictions, where Joe and I make honest predictions on how our respective football teams will go. And Joe, I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to be okay this week. I do apologise, but I'm a bit concerned for the Bombers. I think Adelaide are pushing for top 4. Did they come off a loss? I feel like they
lost to the Pies.
They lost to the Pies. They will be fuming. They will have a point to prove. They want percentage.
Yep.
I'm just giving you my honest prediction. I'm going to say Adelaide by 83.
Wow, 83. Tell us how you really feel, man.
I'm sorry. It's honest predictions. What about my boys, the D's, going up to the Gold Coast, where my good friend Christian Petrarca will be meeting his old team for the first time. How are we going to go?
I find it amazing, actually, what a fall from grace this has been for the Suns. And he's been in the media, your boy, the big baby. He's been on the media. He's been in the media. He's, the way he was dealing with Lombard, and
Great
Lombard
leadership.
telling him, great leadership, and Lombard telling him to F off. So pretty interesting stuff. Hard to see how they win with the way that they've been going. And you guys would be smarting after your loss. You knew it was a big opportunity to claim a big scalp. I know your record away from the G isn't great, but you know what? I'm backing in your boys in what will be a seesawing affair. The floor's completely fallen out at the Suns. They've got no hope, and they've been eclipsed. Let's just say that. I'm gonna say the Demons win this game by 29 points.
Ooh,
Comfortable
I appreciate
5-goal.
That would be very nice. I appreciate that. After I've just taken down the Bombers in my prediction, you never know.
I'm magnanimous.
Yeah. Well, that's honest predictions. It's what the segment is.
Correct.
So
honest predictions. It's not flattery. It's not flattering. The truth hurts sometimes. And what do we reckon about St. John's Mob? The Tigers. They're hosting the Weagles at the MCG.
That could be a good game in terms of it could be a close game. Maybe not a high standard, but that's I think they're a big chance for that. I would probably say 50-50.
Yeah.
If it was in Perth, I'd go West Coast, but if it's at the G, then I I think the Tigers might get a scalp in the West Coast Eagles, and they might ease the pressure on Ooze at the moment, because I think he's under the pump a bit. My former favourite player, Ooze. So, what do you think?
Look, I've got a vested interest in this. I really hope the Tigers win, because then they get back on top of us, and
Yep.
we get Harry Van Hatten with our pick. So I'd love it for the Tigers to win, but they're just not playing good football. Whereas the Eagles are, and I reckon the Eagles win this game. I think the
Yeah.
Eagles are in better form, and it's the same dimensions as Optus. So I'm
Yep.
going to say that the Eagles win this one by 13 points.
Wow. Well, I've just realised I didn't put in my margin, so I'll say the Tigers by 2 points.
Eee!
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And now for our takeaway, guys, just a little bit of a summary. Final sirens here. 3 takeaways. We'll say the first thing first. An income disparity does not automatically create an entitlement for spousal maintenance. Remember, spousal maintenance, it's about one person's inability to support themselves adequately and the other person's ability or capacity to
Mm,
provide that assistance.
yep. Second key takeaway, I guess, is that evidence is essential, as it always is. So when going through disclosure, go through what your budget is, what your weekly expenditure is, bank statements, income records, those sorts of things really form part of whether you can request spousal maintenance, and whether that kind of evidence would support an application for spousal. And similarly, reviewing your ex-partner's income and their expenditure would be a good way to work out whether or not they have the capacity to meet that shortfall.
And thirdly, don't overlook the timing of things. Remember, if you're married, you don't have to wait for divorce in order to apply. But if you have, and you have gone and divorced, you've got 12 months. And if you're a de facto relationship, you've got 2 years from the date of your breakdown. So it's really important that you make a note. These are really important dates. You might think that it's just purely sentimental. No, it also has massive legal ramifications as well. So make sure that you keep your eyes on those. And that brings us to the end of this new look episode. Charlie, thank you so much, as always, my friend, for fronting up. And we hope we get to see St. on the podcast next week. How do you think we went today?
I think we got through it relatively unscathed. So, thanks, Joe, for your work as always. You've done a great job.
No, not a problem. Thank you as always. Guys, if you like what you had to see or hear from us today, please make sure that you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to not miss out on any of our episodes. And please feel free to leave us some feedback down below. If there are any topics that you want us to cover, we're more than happy. Any questions you have, we can dedicate a frequently asked question type of segment for those. And if you're listening to us on Spotify, please rate us 5 stars. It goes a long way to helping our continued outreach into the community, where we can continue to demystify family law by drawing those wonderful connections to our beloved AFL footy. And on that note, we'll see you all in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye for now.